Here's what Jung discovered that modern spirituality desperately avoids. Spirituality isn't about transcending your darkness. It's about integrating it, not becoming light by rejecting darkness, but becoming whole by uniting opposites. Think about what modern spirituality promises. Transcend your ego, rise above your shadow, overcome your darkness, become pure love, pure light, pure consciousness. Escape suffering through elevation. Achieve enlightenment by leaving behind everything lower. This sounds spiritual. It feels spiritual. Every tradition seems to teach it. But Jung said, this isn't spirituality. It's spiritual materialism, the ego's strategy to feel superior while remaining fundamentally unchanged. Because here's what actually happens when you pursue transcendence. You split yourself. You identify with the spiritual parts and reject the unspiritual parts. You become more fragmented, not more whole, more divided, not more integrated. You're not transcending darkness, you're repressing it. Not becoming enlightened, just becoming spiritually inflated. Jung watched this pattern constantly. People who'd meditated for decades but hadn't integrated their shadow. Spiritual teachers radiating love and light while leaking unconscious hostility. Seekers pursuing awakening while using spirituality to avoid psychological work. Communities claiming enlightenment while projecting shadows collectively. He'd confront them with something brutal. You're not pursuing spirituality. You're pursuing ego enhancement through spiritual means. Real spirituality doesn't transcend darkness. It integrates it. Doesn't create purity. It creates wholeness. And wholeness includes everything you're trying to transcend. This is the core misunderstanding. And if you don't correct it, everything you think is spiritual growth is actually spiritual bypassing. Let's explore the truths that reveal what spirituality actually requires. The first truth Jung insisted on is the foundation. And once you understand it, you'll see why most spiritual practice is missing the point. Real spirituality is integration, not transcendence. It's not about rising above your humanity. It's about becoming fully human by integrating all aspects of yourself, including what you've labeled unspiritual. Modern spirituality operates on a vertical model, lower and higher. Your ego is lower, your soul is higher. Your darkness is lower, your light is higher. Your humanity is lower, your divinity is higher. The spiritual path is climbing from lower to higher, transcending the base to reach the elevated. Jung said, this model is psychologically destructive because it creates splitting. You identify with what you label higher and repress what you label lower. You're not integrating your psyche, you're dividing it. Not becoming whole, becoming fragmented into spiritual me and unspiritual me. Real spirituality operates on a different model, not vertical transcendence, but horizontal integration. Not climbing above your humanity, but including all of it. Not rejecting darkness, but integrating it consciously. Not transcending the ego, but understanding its proper place. Think of it like building a house. Transcendent spirituality says, build upward, keep adding floors to get closer to heaven. But you never reinforce the foundation, never repair the basement, never address what's below. You just keep building up, up, up. Eventually, the whole structure becomes unstable because the foundation can't support all that height. Integration spirituality says, build deep before you build high. Strengthen the foundation, explore the basement, include everything in the structure, then build upward from a stable base. Jung observed that people pursuing transcendence would achieve impressive spiritual experiences, states of bliss, moments of unity, profound insights. But their lives remained unchanged. They'd return from retreat to the same patterns, same shadows, same unconsciousness. Why? Because they'd had peak experiences while leaving their base psychology unintegrated. One of Jung's patients perfectly illustrated this. A man who'd spent 15 years in spiritual practice, meditation, yoga, retreats with renowned teachers. He could discourse beautifully on non-dual awareness and had experienced profound mystical states. But in his actual life, he was emotionally unavailable to his family, financially irresponsible, sexually compulsive, and deeply unhappy. Jung told him, "You've been pursuing transcendence while avoiding integration. You've had experiences of your higher self while leaving your actual self unexamined. Your spirituality is bypassing your psychology. And that's not spirituality, that's spiritual escape." Through analysis, the man discovered his spiritual pursuit was actually an avoidance mechanism. Every meditation retreat was avoiding marital problems. Every mystical experience was escaping emotional work. Every teaching about transcending ego was justifying not addressing his actual egotism. Real spiritual work required the opposite of what he'd been doing. Not transcending his humanity, but integrating it. Not having peak experiences, but doing shadow work. Not pursuing higher states, but addressing base patterns. Not meditating to escape his life, but being present to his actual existence. This is what Jung meant. Spirituality is integration. Integrating shadow, not transcending it. Including darkness, not rejecting it. Becoming whole, not becoming pure. It's horizontal work before vertical work. Depth before height. Psychological integration before mystical experience. When you understand this, that spirituality is integration, not transcendence, your entire approach shifts. You stop pursuing experiences and start doing work. Stop trying to become higher and start becoming whole. Stop seeking transcendence and start practicing integration. This second truth confronts the core assumption most seekers hold sacred. Your darkness isn't something to transcend on the spiritual path, it's part of the path itself. Jung discovered that what you call darkness contains the exact medicine your spirituality needs. Rejecting it creates spiritual poverty, not spiritual purity. Most spiritual traditions teach some version of this. Light is good, darkness is bad. Love is spiritual, anger is unspiritual. Compassion is elevated, selfishness is base. The path is moving from darkness into light, from lower emotions to higher consciousness, from human weakness to divine strength. Jung said, "This dualism is spiritually immature because it creates a fundamental split in your psyche. You're declaring half of your human experience unspiritual and trying to eliminate it. But that half doesn't disappear. It goes underground, into the shadow, where it becomes more powerful, more destructive, and completely unconscious. Real spiritual maturity requires recognizing your darkness is as sacred as your light. Your anger contains your power. Your selfishness contains your boundaries. Your aggression contains your ability to act. Your sexuality contains your life force. Your shadow contains your disowned strength. Think of darkness like soil. Most people see soil as dirty, inferior, something to rise above. They want to be pure flowers reaching toward the light, untouched by the darkness of earth. But here's what they miss. Flowers don't grow despite the soil. they grow because of it. The soil contains all the nutrients, minerals, and organic matter that creates life. Try to grow a flower without soil, and it dies. Without darkness, there's no growth. The sacred isn't separate from the soil, it emerges from it. Jung watched spiritual seekers attempt to become all light, pure love, pure compassion, pure peace. And he'd observed them become spiritually impoverished. They'd lost their vitality, their passion, their edge, their authenticity. They'd become what he called spiritually anemic, technically pure but fundamentally lifeless. One patient, a woman who'd spent years in Buddhist practice, came to Jung depleted. She'd successfully cultivated equanimity, non-attachment, and compassion. But she'd lost all capacity for anger, desire, or assertion. Her marriage had become passionless. Her career had stagnated. Her life felt empty despite her spiritual development. Jung showed her something radical. Your spirituality has made you weak, not whole. You've transcended your darkness, but in doing so, you've transcended your power. You need to reclaim your shadow, not as something unspiritual, but as something essential to your spiritual completion. Through analysis, she discovered she'd used spirituality to avoid her rage at childhood wounds. The Buddhist teaching of letting go became her justification for never standing up for herself. Non-attachment became her excuse for never wanting anything. Compassion became her performance while denying her capacity for healthy aggression. Her spiritual path required the opposite of what she'd been taught. Not transcending her anger, but integrating it. Not eliminating her desires, but understanding them. Not becoming above her shadow, but bringing it into consciousness. Not purifying herself, but completing herself. Jung observed that truly spiritual people weren't all light, they were whole. They contained darkness consciously rather than unconsciously. They'd integrated their shadow rather than repressing it in spiritual language. They were complete humans, not sanitized saints. This is the second truth. Your darkness is sacred, not to indulge, but to integrate, not to act out, but to own, not to identify with exclusively, but to include consciously. Real spirituality doesn't eliminate darkness. It makes darkness conscious, doesn't transcend shadow. It integrates shadow, doesn't create purity. It creates wholeness that includes all aspects, light and dark. When you understand this, that your darkness is sacred, you stop trying to kill half of yourself in pursuit of spiritual purity. You recognize that wholeness requires everything, including what you've labeled unspiritual. And you begin the real work, not transcendence, but integration. The first two truths challenge transcendence and elevated darkness, but this third one reveals what spirituality is actually moving toward. True spirituality isn't about choosing light over darkness, it's about uniting them. Jung called this the union of opposites, and he insisted, this union is what every spiritual tradition is actually pointing toward, even when they use transcendence language. Most people understand spirituality as a choice between opposites, good versus evil, light versus darkness, spirit versus matter, divine versus human. And the spiritual path is choosing the right side, good, light, spirit, divine, and eliminating the wrong side. But Jung discovered something profound in his study of alchemy, mysticism, and world religions. The deepest spiritual teachings aren't about choosing sides. They're about transcending the duality itself through union. Not light winning over darkness, but light and darkness uniting to create something beyond both. He called this the conjunctio, the sacred marriage of opposites. And he found it everywhere. Alchemy's union of sun and moon, Tantra's integration of masculine and feminine, Christianity's incarnation of divine and human, Taoism's balance of yin and yang. Every tradition points toward the same truth. Wholeness comes from uniting what appears opposite, not from choosing one over the other. This is radically different from how most people practice spirituality. They're not trying to unite opposites. They're trying to eliminate one side, get rid of the ego, keep the soul, transcend the body, realize the spirit, eliminate darkness, become light. But this creates perpetual warfare within yourself, a civil war between what you identify with and what you reject. One of Jung's patients, a meditation teacher, embodied this internal war. He'd spent 20 years cultivating detachment, peace, and spiritual presence. But internally, he was in constant battle with his unspiritual impulses, desires, ambitions, angers. Every meditation was a fight to transcend these lower aspects. Every spiritual practice was warfare against his humanity. Jung told him something that changed everything. You're not pursuing enlightenment. You're pursuing victory in a war with yourself. Real spirituality isn't victory. It's peace through union. Not defeating your darkness, but marrying it to your light. Not eliminating your ego, but uniting it with yourself. Through analysis, the teacher discovered that his spiritual practice was perpetuating the very division it claimed to heal. His meditation was a weapon against his humanity. His teachings about peace were covering internal warfare. He wasn't becoming whole. He was becoming more divided while calling it spiritual. Think of it like two political parties locked in eternal conflict. Each believes if they just win decisively enough, there will be peace. But the very structure of winning ensures continued division. Real peace doesn't come from one side winning. It comes from a new structure that transcends the binary. Not the right defeating the left or vice versa, but a union that includes both perspectives in something higher. Your internal spiritual work is the same. Not light defeating darkness, but a union that transcends the duality. Real spiritual work required integrating opposites, detachment and passion, peace and intensity, consciousness and instinct, spirit and body, light and darkness. Not choosing between them, but uniting them. Not balancing them carefully, but integrating them completely so they're no longer experienced as opposites. This is Jung's third truth. The union of opposites is the goal, not victory of light over darkness, but their sacred marriage. Not transcendence of humanity by divinity, but their integration. Not elimination of ego by self, but their right relationship. The symbol Jung used was the divine androgyne, the being that contains both masculine and feminine, light and dark, human and divine, all united in one whole. When you understand this, that spirituality is union, not victory. You stop warring with yourself. Stop trying to eliminate half your nature. Stop seeing spirituality as choosing sides in an internal conflict. You begin the real work, not defeating opposites but marrying them. Not choosing light but uniting it with darkness. Not transcending but integrating. If these truths are confronting your understanding of spirituality, revealing that it's integration, not transcendence, that darkness is sacred, that opposites must unite, you're experiencing what Jung called the death of spiritual naivety. Most people begin spirituality with simple dualism, good versus bad, light versus dark, spiritual versus unspiritual. But real spiritual maturity requires moving beyond that dualism into something more complex, more paradoxical, more whole. These aren't comfortable truths. They challenge everything modern spirituality teaches. But Jung insisted, if you don't understand these, you're not on a spiritual path. You're on an ego path using spiritual language. Before we explore the final two truths that reveal why most spiritual practice fails and what real spirituality requires, check out our new guide, True Self-Discovery, with 24 practical reflection exercises designed to help you find your way within. Click below to get True Self-Discovery. Let's continue, because these final insights show why integration is more difficult and more necessary than transcendence ever was. This fourth one exposes what prevents it, and why most spiritual seekers never actually do the work. Spiritual bypassing, using spirituality to avoid psychological work, is the most common form of spiritual failure. And Jung would say, if you're bypassing, you're not being spiritual. You're being spiritually defended. Here's what spiritual bypassing looks like. Using meditation to avoid difficult emotions, spiritual concepts to explain away relational problems. Everything happens for a reason, to bypass grief. Forgiveness teachings to avoid healthy anger. Non-attachment to justify emotional unavailability. Presence to escape planning. Surrender to avoid responsibility. It's using spiritual practice as a defense mechanism, not to grow, but to avoid growth. Not to integrate, but to transcend without integration. Not to become whole, but to feel spiritual while remaining fragmented. Jung saw this as epidemic in spiritual communities. People who could discuss enlightenment eloquently, but couldn't maintain healthy relationships. Teachers who radiated peace, but treated staff terribly. Seekers who'd had profound awakenings, but still operated from unconscious wounding. Communities preaching love while projecting shadows. Think of spiritual bypassing, like using expensive skincare products while refusing to see a doctor about a serious rash. The products feel spiritual, luxurious, pure, elevated. You can tell yourself you're taking care of your skin. But the rash isn't a skincare problem. It's a medical problem that requires diagnosis and treatment. No amount of expensive products will address what needs medical intervention. Spiritual practice is the skincare. Psychological work is the medicine. Most people keep buying spiritual products while refusing the psychological treatment they actually need. One of Jung's most powerful cases involved a spiritual teacher who came to him in crisis. She taught mindfulness, meditation, and presence. Her students revered her consciousness, but privately she was collapsing. Panic attacks, relationship chaos, financial disaster. She came to Jung devastated. I teach presence, but I'm falling apart. What's wrong with me? Jung's diagnosis was brutal. Nothing is wrong with you spiritually. Everything is wrong with you psychologically. You've used spirituality to bypass psychological work. Your mindfulness practice has been a sophisticated avoidance of trauma. Your presence teachings have kept you from being present to your own pain. You're not spiritually failing. You're spiritually bypassing, and it's finally catching up. Through analysis, she discovered she'd never addressed childhood trauma. The spiritual practices that should have led to integration became defense mechanisms against integration. Her teaching about being present was actually keeping her dissociated from her past. Her mindfulness was a controlled practice that avoided the uncontrolled emergence of repressed material. Real spiritual work required the opposite. Not more practice, but less defense. Not more mindfulness, but more feeling. Not more presence, but more past. Not more spiritual development, but more psychological work. She had to stop bypassing and start integrating. Jung identified key signs of spiritual bypassing: emotional repression disguised as detachment, spiritual explanations for psychological problems, premature forgiveness that bypasses anger, excessive positivity that avoids darkness, spiritual superiority that masks insecurity, compassion, performance while lacking empathy, using practices to avoid rather than address issues. This is the fourth truth. Spiritual bypassing is spiritual failure. It's the ego's most sophisticated strategy, using spirituality itself as defense against transformation. And it's invisible from inside because it looks and feels spiritual. You're meditating, attending retreats, reading teachings, but you're doing it all to avoid the real work, psychological integration. When you understand this, that bypassing is failing, you stop using spirituality as escape and start using it as integration. Stop practicing to feel spiritual and start practicing to become whole. Stop transcending your problems and start addressing them. Stop using spiritual language to avoid psychological truth and start doing the uncomfortable work that creates real transformation. The previous truths explain what spirituality requires, but this final one reveals what it creates and why that's nothing like what most people expect. What emerges from real spiritual work isn't a perfected ego, it's the self. And the self isn't pure, elevated, or transcendent. It's whole, integrated, and paradoxically human divine. Jung said, "The self contains everything, including what you tried to eliminate." Most spiritual seekers have an image of the goal, the enlightened person, the awakened being, the realized self. And that image is usually some version of perfection, pure love, constant peace, transcended ego, no darkness, no struggles, no humanness. A divine being that's overcome humanity. Jung said, "This image is pure fantasy. It's what the ego imagines spirituality creates, a perfected version of itself. But real spiritual work doesn't create perfection. It creates wholeness. And wholeness is messy, paradoxical, human, and divine simultaneously. The self, Jung's term for the totality of the psyche, both conscious and unconscious, isn't pure. It includes everything: light and shadow, conscious and unconscious, divine and human, order and chaos. The self is the union of all opposites, not the victory of one side. When the self emerges through integration work, you don't become a sanitized saint. You become a complete human. You contain your shadow consciously. Express your darkness appropriately. Access your full range of human emotions. Live paradox rather than choosing sides. Jung himself embodied this. He wasn't purely light. He was whole. He could be tender and ruthless, compassionate and confrontational, mystical and grounded, loving and fierce. He contained opposites that others found uncomfortable. He didn't fit spiritual stereotypes, and that was evidence of his integration, not his failure. One of his most profound statements: "I'd rather be whole than good, because goodness is an ego performance. Wholeness is truth. Goodness maintains splitting. I'm good, that's bad. Wholeness integrates everything. I contain all possibilities and choose consciously." Think of it like a complete musical instrument versus one that only plays certain notes. Most spiritual seekers are trying to become an instrument that only plays beautiful notes, melodious, harmonious, pleasant. They're literally removing keys from their piano so they can only play spiritual sounds. But a complete instrument plays all notes, beautiful and discordant, harmonious and dissonant, high and low. A master musician needs the full range, not a limited instrument that can only play pretty songs. The self is the complete instrument, and what it plays is your authentic life, which includes all notes, not just the comfortable ones. A patient who had completed years of Jungian analysis described what emerged. I'm not more pure or elevated. I'm more complete. I'm not always peaceful. I'm authentically present to whatever is. I'm not transcending my humanity. I'm fully inhabiting it, including the dark parts. I contain my shadow, my light, my humanness, my divinity. I'm whole, not perfect. And that wholeness feels more spiritual than any transcendence I ever pursued. This is Jung's final truth. The self emerges from integration, not perfection. From including everything, not eliminating what's uncomfortable. From uniting opposites, not choosing sides. From becoming whole, not becoming good. The irony is profound. Most spiritual seekers are trying to become more spiritual by eliminating their humanness. But real spirituality creates something that looks surprisingly human, just fully human. Not transcended human, but integrated human. Human that includes divine, divine that includes human. The union of opposites that creates the self. When you understand this, that the goal is wholeness, not perfection, your entire practice transforms. You stop trying to become something you're not, and start integrating everything you are. Stop pursuing spiritual perfection and start embracing human wholeness. Stop trying to transcend your nature and start completing it. And what emerges isn't what you expected. It's not a perfected ego. It's the self, complete, whole, containing all opposites, fully human and fully divine. Not transcendent, but integrated. Not pure, but whole. Not what your ego wanted to become, but what you actually are when everything is included. If you're beginning to see what Jung meant, that spirituality is radically different from what modern practice teaches. You're understanding the core truth he insisted on. Spirituality is integration, not transcendence. Your darkness is sacred, not sinful. The union of opposites is the goal, not victory of one side. Spiritual bypassing is spiritual failure, not spiritual practice. The self emerges from wholeness, not perfection. These 5 truths reveal why most spiritual seeking fails, because it's built on the wrong foundation. Transcendence instead of integration, purity instead of wholeness, choosing sides instead of uniting opposites. Jung watched seekers spend decades pursuing spirituality while missing the point entirely. Meditating to avoid feeling, practicing to bypass psychology, seeking transcendence to escape humanity, using spirituality as defense against transformation. Real spirituality is harder than transcendence because it requires including everything. You can't reject half of yourself, can't bypass uncomfortable work, can't choose light over darkness. You have to integrate all of it, shadow and light, human and divine, ego and self. But that integration creates something transcendence never could: genuine wholeness. Not the spiritual performance of wholeness, but the actual integration of all parts. Not what looks spiritual, but what is whole. If you don't understand what Jung said about spirituality, you'll waste years on practices that feel spiritual, but create nothing real. You'll pursue transcendence while missing integration. Chase purity while avoiding wholeness. Try to become spiritual while rejecting half of your humanity. But if you understand these 5 truths, everything changes. Spirituality is integration. Stop trying to transcend, start including everything. Your darkness is sacred. Stop rejecting it, start integrating it. Union of opposites is the goal. Stop choosing sides, start uniting them. Spiritual bypassing is failure. Stop defending, start integrating. The self emerges from wholeness. Stop pursuing perfection, start becoming complete. These aren't popular teachings. They challenge everything modern spirituality sells. But Jung was clear. If you're not doing this, you're not on a spiritual path. You're on an ego path using spiritual language. Real spirituality is messier, harder, less impressive than what most people pursue. It requires shadow work, not just meditation. Psychological integration, not just spiritual experiences. Embracing your full humanity, not just pursuing divinity. But it creates something real, the self. Not the perfected ego, but the whole psyche. Not transcendent purity, but integrated wholeness. Not what you wanted to become, but what you actually are when nothing is excluded. That's spirituality. Everything else is just ego development wearing spiritual clothing. If this revealed what spirituality actually requires, subscribe to this channel for Jungian psychology that challenges spiritual assumptions. To dive even deeper into Jung's revolutionary psychology and what it means for your spiritual awakening, click the recommended video on your screen now. Remember, spirituality isn't about becoming more spiritual. It's about becoming more whole. And wholeness includes everything you thought spirituality would eliminate.